I ordered some new ramps for my Elvira. They're made by Starship Fantasy, and these things are gorgeous. And you get so used to looking at ramps that you think are nice and clean in your machine, but you know, truth be told, they're 30 or 40 years old. It's pretty incredible to see brand new, clear, like flawless ramps. These are great. They come with all the mounts for switches and protectors at the end of the ramp. These things are often riveted on, and it's kind of difficult to do that riveting yourself unless you have proper tools. So it's great when they come ready assembled like this. I'm anxious to get them installed. Let's get going. The new ramps came with ramp decals to replace this imagery on the Monster Slide ramp here, and also the Party Punch ramp here. I need to get the ramps removed first before I want to apply the decals on the new ramps, so I can use the old ramps as a template to make sure I place these decals just right. So let's take a look at all the screws that have to come out to remove the ramps. Alright, starting with the Monster Slide ramp, the largest ramp in the game. It actually runs behind the playfield. I think the first thing we'll have to do is remove this habitrail. So there's a bolt here, a screw into the playfield down there, and then two screws into the playfield at the vertical up kicker. That should allow this whole habitrail to come out, which will make it easier to get the left part of the Monster Slide out. It's actually separated behind the playfield here. So the entrance to the Monster Slide looks like the two screws at the bottom of the ramp, then a screw on this post here, and I know there is one screw that holds the two pieces of the ramp together behind the playfield, so we'll have to raise the playfield to get access to that behind the back wall. Then on the right side we've got a post here. There is a micro switch there, so I'll have to cut the zip ties, remove that wiring. I want to unscrew this micro switch. Following it down further, there is a post here and a post here, and then a screw and a nut at the exit of the ramp. That should take care of the Monster Slide. Then on the right side of the playfield we've got the Party Punch ramp. Again, two screws down at the entrance. Looks like two screws at the posts. A screw into a post here. And then I think the next one is one screw into the playfield at the exit by the vertical up kicker. Now I've already replaced on the left side the ramp entry gate switch with a MRS magnetic reed switch. So I don't have that mechanism on the left side. I'll have to detach the MRS. And that'll come out with the ramp. On the right side I still have the original gate switch, so we'll have to detach that, and I'll go ahead and replace that with an MRS as well, just like I did over here. So I think that might be about it. Sometimes some other pieces have to come out with it to even get access to those screws. There's especially a lot of extra plastics. I missed these down here to make sure the ball doesn't get stuck anywhere. And there's some over here too. So some of those will have to come off as well. Alright, let's get going on that. This was my first time removing the ramps from this game. I didn't really know how they were held together. There's a metal tab screwed into the back wall of the playfield, and both halves of the ramp rest on top of it. They're held together by a single screw that threads into that metal tab. You can access it if you just lift the playfield a little bit and reach over the top of the playfield wall. Don't forget to raise the playfield and disconnect the ramp switches. There's a ramp entry switch for the left side of the monster slide, and there's a ramp made switch on the right side of the monster slide. There's a connector for both of them, so you can detach both of them. I actually removed the micro switch from the right side of the ramp. It would have been easier just to disconnect it and pull it out with the ramp. The screws that hold in the habitrail in the back next to the vertical upkicker are kind of a pain to get to. They're really deep, and the habitrail blocks access to them. I used a socket driver with a long extension to get to it. Might have been able to use a small ratchet if I had removed the boogeyman mechanism. But that's more work. If you've got an extension for a socket driver or a long extension for a ratchet, that's probably the way to go. So I've had Elvira for several years, and over time, I look at the playfield and I see little things that are wrong. It's not too hard to find things that are wrong on a 40-year-old game. But I noticed that this jam lights lock plastic is bent and marred right on this corner here. And I always look at that and I think about buying a new plastic. Well, I ended up buying 3 of them over the years because I kept looking at it and kept buying them and never actually replacing it. This is a great opportunity for me to replace it. So I've got 3 plastics to choose from, and what's interesting is all of these are different. I don't remember where I got them from, but I mean you can see this one's darker, orange color. This one's a bit darker with some dithering, you can see, and this one is lighter yellow. And then the green around the edge is different on all of them too. So I'm wondering which one I should use. This one's probably the best match in terms of both the yellow and the green. This one actually matches the green on the playfield, which is interesting. At least the green that the playfield has become over the years of fading in the sun. This one actually matches this orange better, but it's not the original color of the plastic. Or at least it's not the color the plastic has become. I do this a lot. I actually ended up with 2 monster slides too, because I kept looking at this monster slide, foot being, or a hand I guess, his hand being broken, and kept thinking I should replace it. I only ordered 2 of them. Kind of nice sometimes because these are both different too. The registration's a bit off on this one. He's a bit crooked. This one's a much better print. Anyway, I'll have to figure out which one of these to use. Alright, old ramp, new ramp. I need to transfer these guard plastics to the new one. Also on the old ramp I had ramp protectors because these ramps were getting pretty fragile. I'll take those off. I don't think I'm going to put them on the new ramps. Trying to see if these are any thicker than the old ones. I don't think they are, but I'm sure they're not as brittle as this plastic has become. So for now, I'll leave these ramp protectors off. But I will take them off the old ramp and keep them with the machine, just in case I want to use them in the future. So let's get these off. So these ramp protectors, you can tell they did their job. There's a lot of ball wear right there. This particular ramp has all sorts of plastic protrusions and extra plastic parts screwed into it. Those are there to prevent the ball from getting stuck. You'll see them on almost every pinball machine. They're extra parts that don't look like they serve any purpose, like extra posts and extra pieces of clear plastic. Those aren't really important for home use, but they were really important when the machine was on location. If a ball gets stuck, then the machine was out of commission until you could call a tech out and remove the glass and free the ball. Alright, so I'm going to use the old ramp as a placement guide for the decals. One thing I noticed is that the bottom of the decal is pushed right up against these rivets so that there's no gap between this metal and the decal. So I have to be careful of that. Then this one wraps around the back right there. And this one is on the edge, right there. So I'll have to put it right there. And it looks like a screw goes through it once it's on there. Alright. Applying these decals was probably the most stressful part of the whole thing. Every time I touched them, I could see my fingerprints show up in the adhesive. At one point, a small piece of lint fell on the one of these yellow decals, one of the long yellow decals, and I knew if I left it on there, I could see it through the ramp, and it would bug me to no end. So I spent forever trying to dig it out with a razor blade, without marring the decal or putting a hole in it. I started using the paper backing the decals came on, the glossy side of it that won't stick to the decal. I started using that to hold the decal with instead of using my fingers. That way I wouldn't touch the adhesive. That worked out pretty well. Alright, looks pretty good. I was a little bit off here. There's some decal sticking out, so I'm gonna see if I can cut that off. Alright, next step on the party punch ramp, I think, is to apply the MRS to the bottom. MRS doesn't have to go exactly where this switch was, which is right here. The main thing to note with MRS is that it has to span the entire ramp. So if it's only this long, then it can only go here. It can't go here. Because it has to be able to sense when the ball rolls up the ramp, no matter which side the ball rolls on. So we can't leave any gaps on the edges. So I'll have to grab an MRS and see where it makes sense to put it. Okay, so here's the MRS. If you're not familiar with these, then watch my video on MRS because they're pretty cool. I want to make sure that first, most important thing is that the MRS spans the entire ramp so that it can detect the ball no matter which side of the ramp the ball rolls up on, this side or this side. So probably right at the bottom of the blue bottle here. It's where it spans the entire inside of the ramp. And then I want to make sure that these wires are going to be long enough to reach the connector underneath the playfield. I think it'll be pretty close. So I think I'm going to put it there. After I got the MRS applied to the bottom of the ramp, I slid some heat shrink over the 2 switch wires, and then added a Molex 0.062 inch 2-conductor connector on the end that mates up with the existing connector underneath the playfield. Before we go much further, I should say that placing the MRS on the ramp here didn't work out at the end. The ball has to roll underneath the ramp to escape the pops, and the MRS prevented the ball from rolling freely. If you want to use an MRS in the Party Punch ramp, you'll need to place it higher up on the ramp, closer to the bend. Alright, now for the left side of the monster slide. You can see a couple things about this original ramp here. First, you can see where I messed up my MRS installation because of this gap right here. If the ball rolls up the right side of the ramp over here, then the MRS doesn't register it because of that gap. Also, there's lights shining through the bottom of the ramp, and you can see the MRS really well because I put it on the yellow. I wish I had put it like on the arrow here. It would be less obvious if I had put it there, so I'm going to try and do that this time. Also, you can see the cracks that were starting to form on this original ramp. It was cracked. Oh, this is about to fall off. This piece is about to crack off. This plus me messing up the MRS, plus I don't know if you can see it here, but the decal was actually misapplied at the factory. There's big gap right here, big gap right here, and you can see it when you look at the ramp when you're playing. So I hope that I can apply my decal better. We'll see. This is really what drove me to get the new ramps. One thing I noticed here is, unlike the other ramp, which sat pretty much flush with the metal flap, this one has to sit above the metal flap in order to make this bend right here. Otherwise, if you put it down where the other one was, then it misses the ramp, misses the turn. So this one's a bit different. It got pretty stressful trying to put these huge decals on the ramps. Getting them straight was difficult. Getting them applied without any bubbles underneath was really difficult too. If I had it to do over again, I'd probably use... I've heard you can use a spray bottle with a little bit of dishwashing detergent in it, just a tiny bit. You spray the ramp down with that, and then the decal won't stick to it, and you can slide it around and adjust it to get it straight, and then use a straight edge to slide it over the decal and squeegee out the air bubbles, and then just let it sit overnight to dry, and let the adhesive set in. That would have been a lot less stressful than what I did. It worked out pretty well for me, but I was sweating bullets putting these things on, hoping I got them straight. pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to apply the MRS. Not make the same mistake I did last time. This is the ramp that really needs the MRS. I was having tons of ricochets on this ramp with the ball bouncing off the gate switch. The MRS solved that problem, and it doesn't require any adjustment. I can never get that gate switch adjusted right. I applied it higher up the ramp this time, so that it spans the entire width of the ramp. That ended up working out a lot better. I also put it behind the arrow, like I said, so when the lights underneath the ramp shine through it, it's not as obvious that there's a switch right there, because it's harder to see through the picture of the arrow in the ramp. So it's a much better position for the MRS than what I had previously. Alright, last is the actual monster slide. I was a bit surprised because there's only 3 decals left, but there's 4 decals on the monster slide. The one they changed was this one. It used to be 2 separate decals with, I think it's Mummy and Wolfman. But they made it into one that covers the whole section. Still has Wolfman and Mummy. So I was thinking these decals might be easier than the previous ones because they're smaller, but nope, this is a pretty big one. So we gotta do this and Elvira at the top near the switch, and this one goes right here on the back side of the ramp. It's kind of gotta has to tuck in behind this lip. This decal was almost as difficult as the 2 yellow ones. It would have been a lot easier if they had kept the decals separated like they were originally, but they combined them together into this long twisty turny decal that it was hard to get it around all those turns and keep it straight on the ramp. That one that I'm putting on now that has to tuck in underneath the lip on the ramp was a lot harder than I expected it to be. I got really lucky that I didn't have tons of bubbles underneath that one. That's a place where I really wish I had done the wet application. Okay, so here's the problem I see. I've got the MRS right there in the blue bottle. What I didn't think about is when this ramp is in place, that blue bottle is right where the ball exits the pops. It connects it here and it connects it here. So 2, 3 problems. The MRS extends down from the bottom of the ramp a little bit. There's only just enough clearance right there for the ball. So the MRS being there might cause an obstruction. Also, the wire coming down from the MRS is another potential obstruction, because especially with the heat shrink, it's about that thick. So I'm afraid that the wire is going to fall down into the path of the ball, stop the ball from exiting out of the pops. That's not good. Also, the MRS is right where that end of that plastic is. So there's not a lot of room for that there. I think I might go back to the old gate here. This gate never caused me any problems. That one always worked. It was the monster slide that was always problematic for me. So I think I'll keep the MRS and the monster slide. I'll go back to the gate over here. So I'm going to take the MRS off and save that for another machine. So I've switched back to the original gate switch to give more clearance here for the ball to pass out of the pops here. The problem I'm having now is still kind of a clearance issue. The ramp fits in the space really well. Couple issues. It doesn't fit, so that I suspect the plastic is a lot thicker than the original ramp. And because of that, the ramp doesn't sit flush with the playfield. I can line up the screw holes, like just right about there. But there's no like beveled lip on the bottom of the ramp. So although the metal flap is making decent contact with the playfield, it's not raised or anything. The ramp doesn't sit right down on top of the playfield. There's 3 solutions maybe that I've heard to fix that. The first one, and probably the best one if you've got the right tools, is to route out a little area right on the playfield where the ramp meets the playfield. Not where the flap is, but where the plastic meets the playfield. So put a little depression in the playfield to let that thicker ramp sit underneath the surface of the playfield. That's probably the best solution if you've got the right tools, like a trim router, and you're confident in using them so that you know you're not going to mess up your playfield. I don't have the right tools, and I'm definitely not confident. Next solution maybe is to heat up the ramp and form it better so it can sit flush with the playfield. That probably involves taking the flap off. I don't have the right tools or know how to do that. Next solution is to sand down the edge of the lip so that it can sit flush with the playfield. I'm thinking about doing that. And of course, I guess the fourth solution is do nothing. Just try to get the screws to hold the end of the ramp down good enough. I'm also thinking about doing that. So aside from that, and I think this is a typical issue with new ramps because the aftermarket ramps are thicker on purpose to make the ramps more robust. I had kind of the same problem with Cyclone when I replaced the ramps on that. And with Cyclone, I went with that last solution where I just tried to get the screws to hold it down enough. Last problem I've got is when things are lined up pretty well here and here, the screw hole in the back doesn't match the original hole. 2 choices there. I can either drill a new hole in the ramp to match the hole in the back of the playfield, or I can drill a new hole in the playfield to match the hole in the ramp. Either one of those will work. So I'm going to go ahead and try to fit the ramp without doing anything to make it sit more flush. and to see if I can get enough bite on the two ramp flap screws to hold it in place. Try and get this hole lined up. I can move the post around maybe to help with that. And then I've got to figure out what to do about the hole over here, because it doesn't line up and it's not going to. But first, let's get the ramp in place, starting with these. It's important that the screw heads on these screws are flush with the surface of the ramp so that they don't impede the travel of the ball. But I was having trouble making them flush, and I was afraid that screwing them down too much would cause the ramp to crack. Alright, so I've been staring at these screws for hours. I think I'm just going to try and power through. There's the countersinking is countersunk that way, when the screws actually go in straight up and down. That's kind of the root of the problem. So I think I'm just going to power through. I'm going to drive those screws in as good as I can, get them as low and flush as I can without cracking the ramp. I kind of loosen this post here. I can maybe scoot that post over just enough to get the screw in. And then I'm going to have to drill a hole over here no matter what. So that's just a foregone conclusion there. It's always a pain in the butt to fit thicker ramps, but they're more durable. So I ended up just screwing those screws in really hard until they were mostly flush with the ramp surface. I couldn't get them all the way flush, but I got them down to the point where when I roll a ball across them, they don't make any contact with the ball as it rolls up and down the ramp. I am a bit nervous when screwing into the playfield like that because the wood is so old, so I always back the screw out first to find the thread before I drive it into the wood. It's not too bad. Alright, so those are pretty much flush. That screws on just enough. Now the issue is back here. The hole in the ramp does not line up with the hole in the playfield. I don't know if you can see the hole in the playfield, but oh, there it is. But it is so close to the lip on the ramp that I really couldn't put a screw there. So I'm going to have to find a way to drill a pilot hole where the hole in the ramp is. Alright, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Drill with a Dremel with a gooseneck extension, because this is the only thing that I have that even has a shot of getting right up next to this wall where the screw hole is. I have no idea how this is going to work out. Using a Dremel definitely wasn't ideal, but it did get the job done. If I'd had a flex neck attachment for my normal drill, I would have used that instead. I just had to go slow and use a small bit first and then get bigger. It worked all right. Yay, there's a screw. Alright, next is the exit of the monster slide ramp. You'll want to test fit the ramp first before you attach any screws. Make sure the part of the ramp that is behind the playfield is sitting on top of the metal tab that you'll use to hold the two halves of the ramp together. Then place the exit of the ramp where it will go on top of the sling and the flipper return rail, and then check clearance on the switch on the party punch ramp. That gate switch has a diode on top of it, and on my playfield, I didn't have enough clearance between the micro switch and diode and the bottom of the monster slide ramp, so I had to bend the switch connectors to give myself some room. After you're sure everything fits right, you might consider placing the entrance to the monster slide ramp and then attaching the two halves of the ramp together behind the playfield wall. it's easiest to do that first before you screw everything down to the posts. That way you have some wiggle room. Alright, on to the one that's probably going to be the hardest out of all of them. Getting the entrance to the monster slide. It has to connect to the exit to the monster slide back here. Come around, get in between these two posts. The fit looked really tight here when the rubbers were on these posts. And it was also really tight here against this post and this rubber. There was a flat side on this rubber. This rubber's been on here for a long time, I think. There was a flat side that was on over here, so I rotated it around to put it over here, thinking that it was probably pushed up against the ramp before. Just to give myself a little bit more clearance, get that flat side over here. This has to go under and up along the rubber. And this has to go through this hole. Okay, so the ramps come back here and meet. There's a metal plate with a hole in it, and each ramp also has a hole in it. Right now, my ramp on the right is under the metal plate when it should be over it. So I've got to redo the monster slide exit so that it comes in over that plate, and then manage to line up all three holes and get a screw through it without being able to see it. This is going to be horrible. There. Connected. That took a long time to try to reach behind there, take video with the flashlight, see where the screw holes were, try to get it screwed in. Advice, I guess. I needed to be able to move the ramps back and forth like this, and to do that I had to lift this ramp up and let it rotate. Really same with this one too. So get the screws through the first hole, wiggle them around, get some pictures back, the video back there, get the screw through the second hole, and then wiggle both together until you can get it aligned with the hole in the metal plate, and then it just screws in. It must be threaded. There's no nut or anything. Anyway, that was kind of hard. So now that they're connected together, it's going to be harder than it was to get the holes to line up. Especially over here, because those holes have to be perfect. The posts don't have to be so perfect, and this is so far away from the connection points that I can probably bend this a little bit to get these to line up. So really, I think the most important holes to get right are probably these two, and everything else can just kind of force it in, hopefully. So I'm going to work on these. The habitrail is pretty big and it blocks access to a lot of different parts in the playfield. So before reinstalling the habitrail, I reassembled everything on the playfield that I could. I ended up having to take the skull tunnel off the playfield because I dropped a screw underneath the entrance to the monster slide ramp. To get that on, I had to remove the left stand-up plastic. So I went ahead and put both of those back on. And then after that, the last major step is reinstalling the habitrail. The habitrail attaches with 2 screws next to the vertical upkicker, a screw pretty much underneath the monster slide entrance ramp, and a nut that attaches the habitrail to the left sling. The 2 screws by the vuck take a pretty long driver to get to, and you need a really long, skinny screwdriver to get to the screw underneath the monster slide ramp. You can adjust the habitrail left and right when attaching it to the left sling. Make sure to test that the ball can fall out of the habitrail and get past the sling rubber on the outside of the sling. She's back. Let's take a look. Ramps look cleaner without the ramp protector. So I was playing a test game and I found a minor issue that you might want to look out for. There's a thread on Pinside talking about crazy stuck balls, and this might be one of those. Back here, there's a little lip, diagonal lip at the bottom of the party punch ramp, and it is possible for a ball to sit on it, just like that. So if you get new ramps for your Elvira, you might want to file the edge of that lip right there that sits against the playfield. Right there. So that it's beveled down like that. So the ball doesn't sit on it, especially right at the bottom right there. And all done. I'm really happy with these ramps. The quality was great. They're really clear. There's no blemishes. All the holes are in the right spot, except for that one on the back. Didn't have to rivet anything. That's great. It's really a pain to have to rivet on the switch mounts. It's great that stuff like this was already on. I feel like these are going to extend the life of the machine significantly. And you know, my ramps were in pretty good shape when I pulled them out, but there were some cracks, and it's just that plastic is 30 years old and it's brittle. I already had ramp protectors on, and I'm sure if I didn't have ramp protectors on, it would have been beaten up even more. So I feel like when parts like this are available, when you can get it, go ahead and get it. Because stuff like this isn't available forever. If Starship Fantasy stops making these ramps, then nobody else makes them. So I'm glad that I got them when I did. I've got no regrets getting these, even though my ramps were already in pretty good shape. Everything works great. It was more trouble than I thought it would be, and that's a few reasons. First off, the ramp entry screws I was concerned that I couldn't get those screws flush. It's important that they're flush to the ramp so that the ball doesn't get hung up on them and go airborne. I thought about sanding down the front lip of the ramp. I thought about routing out an area of the playfield to kind of drop that ramp down a little bit. I thought really hard about dremeling out the holes to see if I could get that screw to, sit down farther. And I ended up just cranking the screw down farther. I was afraid to do that because I thought the ramp might crack, but it didn't, and I got the screws pretty much flush with the ramp. Maybe not as flush as on the original ramp, but that's because the original ramp had a bend to it at the bottom, or at least after being screwed down for 30 years, it had a bend to it that allowed the screws to screw down more. But it worked out. I just cranked the screws down farther and everything worked out. Let's see what else was difficult. That hole at the back of the party punch ramp not being in the right spot was kind of a pain. Where the original hole was on the ramp, I couldn't have drilled a hole. There was no room for a screw there. So I had to make a hole in the playfield where the hole in the ramp was, and that was really close to the back wall of the playfield. If I didn't have that gooseneck on my Dremel, I'm not sure I would have been able to drill a hole there. I might have had to try a self-tapping screw to see if I can get it in there without drilling a pilot hole. So that was kind of a pain, but I found a workaround for it. What else? Oh, the decals. They're really long. The entry to the monster slide is really long. The entry to the party punch ramp is really long. And then in this revision, they took what was 2 short decals and put them together in a much longer decal. So they were really hard to apply and get straight without bubbles. I've got a couple bubbles on the party punch ramp, but you really can't see them from the player's perspective. And things are a little bit misaligned on the entrance to the monster slide ramp, but again, you can't tell just by looking at it. There was probably a better way to apply those decals than what I did. I've heard some people put a little bit of dish soap into some water and just spray down the ramps and then apply the decals on top, and that prevents the decals from sticking immediately, so they can move them around a little bit, and then they kind of just squeegee out the water and the air and then let it sit overnight. That probably would have been the right way to do it. But just by taking my time and making sure everything was lined up and sweating bullets over it, I managed to make it look pretty good without doing it that way. But I think if I had it to do over again, I probably would have tried that instead. What else? The screw in the very back, behind the wall of the playfield, was pretty hard to get in there correctly. It makes me wish I had a rotisserie for the playfield so I could just take the whole thing out. In fact, that would have made everything a lot easier. But I got it in there. So yeah, everything looks great. I'm pretty happy with it.